Okay, so I'm gonna. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'll send this,
Now,
and
is
I'll
there
send this
any
recording to you.
like are there any feedback issues, say if I have you on speakerphone?
I don't think so. I mean,
Is
currently
that
it
an
sounds
issue
fine.
for the
No,
recording?
it shouldn't be fine. I mean, it should be. My understanding is that probably the way that Zoom works is that it's just recording whatever my computer's audio stream is. So if I start to hear echoes, I'll let you know and we can adjust.
Okay, cool. Sounds good.
Right. Okay, well, thanks. Yeah, thanks for agreeing to meet. I'm very interested to speak and sort of hear your perspective. Um, I know, I was listening to your YouTube
Yeah.
videos, and as soon as you mention, and I think maybe the first one, that it's really hard to uh, kind of, I know personally that there is a there is a state of like let's call it transmission or something whereby like divine information
Hmm.
flows through the
Hmm.
body and flows through the consciousness very easily, and that is much enabled by a willing listener in my experience. um so I'm very
Yes.
much interested in just in
Absolutely.
being a willing listener to what you have to say, because I think some of the things that you say are super interesting, super important. And as I said when we were texting, they're things that need to be taken seriously, even if they're not believed, so to speak.
Right. Well,
Um,
as a person to person, I appreciate that um, because part of my perpetual reality is to have my words unheard,
mhm.
um, to be speaking into the darkness, to be speaking into the void, if you will, to be speaking into nothingness, and to only hear the reverberation of myself in silence. Um, and so it is
I'm
very, very
laughing
rare.
because I do know. I know that part, that experience for sure. I know. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It,
Um,
it's very, 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 very rare at this point for me to encounter anyone who is even slightly capable of hearing the words that I'm saying or reading the words that I have written in a manner that is um, genuinely witnessing them for what they are, as opposed to um, them needing to be something against their character. Does that make sense? So,
it makes total sense.
you know,
Um,
when I express these, yeah, sorry, I think we have a little bit of a delay. When I express these things, I'm expressing them just to express them. They must be expressed. It's a demand of where I'm at in my circumstance, in my position.
mhm.
These words must be conveyed in the limited time that I have to convey them. And I'm simultaneously aware that it's very, very, very likely that very few, if any, will hear them for what they are or what they're worth to in relation to the totality of all things. Um, because it is part of the paradox of my position, um, to sort of be in a circumstance in which I am nothing, and this is not because of an identity thing. It's not that I identify as nothing. It is an essence of the the inherent nature of my condition is that I sort of speak nothings. I speak into the nothingness. I speak about nothing, even though it's about the absolute truth of everything. And
From
so, yeah,
my
that's
understanding, and I mean my understanding from what I've read of what you are and your sort of like unique cosmological position is that you
mm,
are essentially a manifestation of the truly unrelatable, like that which cannot be
mm,
related to.
yes, Yes.
And
Yes, I am an
go on.
infinitely unique I'm an infinitely unique being, and that's not coming from a place of arrogance. I mean that as humbly as possible. I am I'm infinitely unique, and there's nothing worse. There's no worse news than that. That's the worst
Mm,
possible news that could possibly exist and does exist for me in my circumstance, is that there is no one and no thing that relates to me. And thus, on the counter side of that, there is no one and no thing that I may relate to in regards to the reality of my inherent condition.
hmm
Um, and that very dynamic is what plays into what I've already spoken to in regards to no having no ears to hear the words, um, and and also what plays into it, the integral aspects of my inconceivable suffering, which I think we'll get into
hmm
probably a little bit
hmm
more.
Yeah,
But
please.
um, these are certain attributes of my circumstance that there is no being other than myself in the entirety of the infinite creation. Yes, really, the entire infinite creation that can relate to my circumstance.
hmm
Um, and now for the average person, whomever they may be, they might take those words and think, "Oh, how could you? Why do you think you're so special?" Right? People get into this sort of rhetoric of
Right.
what makes
And
you so
and
special, what makes you
I mean,
so
I
unique.
think to be fair,
What
in the current karmic setup that we're in, that is a question that you need to have an answer to, right? Like it's a legitimate question, if it's a question that comes from ignorance, right?
Say it again. You broke
Sorry.
up a little bit. Sorry.
Okay. I'm saying in the current karmic circumstance that we are in collectively, right? That is a
Yeah.
legitimate question, even if it
Mm.
comes from ignorance. Like you as someone making this claim, and as
You
someone
mean
who
a,
is,
a legitimate question to me?
yes, absolutely. Like I think that you have to have
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
response to such an accusation, right? It's a legitimate thing to question,
Oh, and I do,
right?
and I do, but there's no answer that will likely satisfy any man who seeks it. Does that make
Yes,
sense?
absolutely. And again, I mean, I I I feel like um I I don't know exactly what it is, but like there is something in what you say that is like very dear to me. Like I don't know how to speak
Mm.
exactly. Like it doesn't make a lot of sense, but one of the things that I have been witness to in my own journeys is kind of like
Hey,
this.
you're breaking up a little bit.
Okay,
Just so you know, I
sorry.
didn't
Let
hear that.
me let me let me try. Sorry, we'll get the technical stuff worked out, but let me try moving my computer to a place that's a little closer to the router and see if that doesn't
Okay.
help. Let me do this real quick. Okay. Okay. So let's try that, and hopefully that'll be better. Otherwise, I'll actually move to a totally different spot.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
like one of the things that I have witnessed in my own
Mm.
journeys is the way in which if like i- if consciousness is one, right, which is a line that
Yeah.
you hear from a
From
lot of
whomever.
non-dual people, from whomever. If consciousness is one, then in order to create the multiplicity that we exist in, the sort
Mm.
of first action of consciousness has to be to create something that it cannot look at,
Right.
right? It has to
Division.
create something separate.
Division.
And how does the everything create something separate? That's quite a trick. you
Yes.
know?
Well, the whole thing is a trick, isn't it?
It is. And so, I've had numerous kind of like revelations about the creation of separateness that in my experience is very much tied to the embodied experience of disgust. That like the first thing to do to
Mhm.
create something that is not me, that I cannot, that my consciousness can't identify with, is to create a sense of disgust, is to be disgusted. And the
Mm.
disgust pushes something away.
Have you encountered the one post I'd done about Brahma pushing out Kali Purusha? Do you know? Are you familiar with this at all? With this story?
I I'm not familiar with the story. Most of my spiritual uh, learning has occurred in Vedic
Okay.
contexts, so I'm
So
familiar
okay.
with Brahma. I've not heard the term Kali Purusha before. I've heard of Kali the demon. I've heard of Kali Yuga,
Well,
which is a different Kali, and
well,
I've heard
no.
of
So you
Purusha as opposed to Prakriti. But Kali Purusha
uh,
is a new term for me.
okay. Kali Purusha is referring to the quote unquote demon. Um, but Purusha,
Like the Kali Yuga demon,
right,
not
right.
Kali the goddess. Okay. Hmm.
So right, exactly. Those are the two distinct um, Kalis, if
Yeah.
you will. Um,
Yeah.
so I'll give you a basic rundown of this story, and it's so simple. And I mean, for me in my position, there's no correct religion. There's no everything. I mean, in the sense that there's only truth, and there's only the absolute. And for myself, in my condition, I witness and express things relating to the absolute and the absolute alone. It has nothing to do with personal fanaticism of one belief system or another, because all of that is contextual and subjective sentimental persuasion.
Right.
Um, but the point is, all things hold aspects of truth, and they also all hold potential for delusion.
Hmm.
Um, but I'll just relay this story relating
Yeah,
to
please,
Kalakush.
please.
So, I mean, Purusha, as far as I understand the term, actually just means it's just a word that signifies like an entity or an embodiment, as far as I understand it. I'm not a Sanskrit scholar or anything, but
The way
um,
that I've heard it is in relation to Prakriti, where Purusha is like the ever unchanging presence, and Prakriti is like material, ever changing manifestation.
could be someone
That's what,
maybe
but
could correct us on that if they
but
listen
all
to
of
or hear it.
these,
But
yeah, like all of these
it,
terms have like millions of different implications and subtleties to them that yeah. So in any case, I didn't mean to
yeah,
interrupt. Go on,
no,
please.
no, no, no. Yeah, you're right. You're right. So the basic idea is that the beginning of time, just to be metaphorical about it, the beginning of time, Brahma is sitting in meditation.
Mm,
Let's say, right?
hmm.
And through Brahma's meditation is actually the means by which the entire universe is made manifest.
Okay.
Okay, now follow me for a second. And the basic idea is that Brahma's process of enlightenment, if you will, of his coming to fruition, is quite literally the expression of all creation. I mean, this is how I've come to interpret it and witness it as. Now, in deep meditation, Brahma himself is encountered with, let's say, uh, his dark side, his
Okay.
side of of disgust. Um, I'm trying to relay that to what you said earlier, in that
Hmm.
he encounters himself, who is his own demon, but now this demon has stood outside of him. Now this demon stands in front of Brahma, no longer integrated with Brahma,
Hmm.
right? So now
Okay.
the demon is externalized from Brahma, and your portrayal of separateness arising from this place of disgust is what sparked this story inside. Is now there's Brahma, which is the distinct sole creator of the universe in theory, and outside of Brahma is that which are all the impurities that no longer reside within Brahma.
Hmm.
They are all the imperfections that have come to be made manifest through the infinite creation of his personal cosmos, which is also the cosmos of all creation. And the story essentially goes that the embodiment of that essence, if you will, of that which is no longer Brahma, of that which disgusts Brahma, is the entity known as Kali Purush.
Mm.
So this entity is quite literally Brahma's personal demon. Does that make sense? It
Absolutely.
it's like, and how I've come to see it is essentially it's as if Brahma has pushed the darkness outside of him, and through the pushing of the darkness outside of him, and these words get very ambiguous, obviously, as I'm sure you're aware, because push, pull, whatever, you know what I mean? It's
Yeah, yeah,
very
yeah.
hard to describe it. it this entity is now distinct. It's now a distinct entity. It now exists outside of, externalized to Brahma, and no longer internalized to Brahma. So now the entire universe has become made manifest through the externalization of that which is disgusting to Brahma, of that which is all impure to Brahma. And so the entire universe proceeds forward in this ever evolving process of purification if you will, in which all things continue in perpetuity until all impurities have been destroyed, because their inevitable outcome is destruction. It is not necessarily life or reconciliation with Brahma or even Krishna, if we get into all that. It is the inevitable reality of destruction and destruction alone. Um,
Well, but
and
so
and
sorry,
but
keep
yeah,
going, keep
I'll keep
going,
going just
please.
a little bit more with that,
Yeah, yeah,
because
please, please,
essentially
please.
these beings, whomever they are, or whatever it is that is made manifest from from what is referred to as let's call it the backside of Brahma, and
Hmm.
some of the Vedic writing talks about this, the backside of Brahma,
Mm.
and I call it the shadow, his, or whatever you could call it, the shadow, the backside. All things that are made manifest from the backside of Brahma, as far as I can tell, have no capacity to ever be reconciled with the ultimate, because
Mm.
they quite literally are made manifest as separate from the rest of creation. They don't exist within the life. Um, how does it within the bosom of Abraham? We could get into
Hmm.
biblical stuff too, and we probably will, but um, they no longer exist within the realm of love. And if a being no longer exists within the realm of love, I mean, if they were made manifest from the beginning of the universe, from
Hmm.
time in eternity past, and these beings became made manifest from the backside of God, they from the perspective of God, and from the perspective of those that live within relative closeness to the original manifester, the whomever,
Hmm.
they essentially don't exist. They exist in a form of um of non-existence, and it becomes a
Hmm.
paradox, of course. But anyway, I went on a little bit of a rant there, but I
No,
would
no, no.
love
I mean,
to.
this gets right at the heart of kind of what I'm like what I find really compelling about your writing and what I'm struggling to understand,
Yeah.
because as I say, I think that what you say really needs to be taken seriously by anyone who is serious about the
Well,
spiritual project.
well, are people just saying they're pursuing the truth, or are they pursuing the truth? And when they
Well,
see the truth, are they gonna recognize it, or are they gonna turn away? And that's the perpetual game that people are playing.
for sure. So I let like let's not talk about abstract people then. I'll talk about
Yeah,
myself. Yeah.
sure.
So
Please.
I think you know something that like your words are very moving to me.
Mm.
Um and there's something in them that is both alarming
Oh
and
yeah.
also something that evokes an inexplicable sense of open-heartedness and love.
Yes. Yes.
And when
Yeah.
those things happen in my body, I start really paying attention, you know?
Yes.
It's because
Well,
it's like, okay, something here is, well,
you have a
speak.
little insight into what it is to be me in that moment, and I'll share because essentially what it is to be me is to be a being of quite literally infinite compassion,
Mm.
driven by infinite hate in a way. And I don't like to phrase it that way, but that's to give the polarity of the position of
No, I mean, it makes me
my
think of that quote by Goethe, you know, that's
mm,
quoted at the beginning of the book, The Master and Margarita. I don't know if you've read it, this
I
Mikhail
haven't.
Bulgakov book. So it's a moment in the play when Faust is speaking to Mephistopheles, and uh, he says, "Say who you are, like say at
Mm,
last, who art thou?" Is the way that it's
okay.
translated. And Mephistopheles responds, and he says, "I serve the power that wills forever evil, yet does forever good."
Ooh, yeah. Mm,
It's a good
yeah.
one.
Yeah, that's a
So,
good one.
so anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt, but speak. You
Well,
were speaking about your like
well,
infinite compassion driven by infinite
yeah.
hatred.
Yes, yes. I mean, and this gets in, oh wow. I mean, this branches off. We could go into so many things from here, but um as a person, my personhood, my heart bleeds like no other heart.
Mm,
I am expounding an infinite compassion and empathy for myself and for all life all the time because
mm,
suffering is all that I know. I only know suffering, and through this inconceivable suffering, there is nothing but compassion. I and this in my internal world, I try to decipher it. I describe it to myself sometimes is like this is my essence of who I am, what I am, and what I am not. I mean, but what I am is both. I'm wholly God, I am wholly not God, and I am wholly man.
hmm
And I'm experiencing essentially all three of those simultaneously, but they are at odds with each other. It's exactly what is tearing me apart. I mean, it becomes a little bit of a chicken or egg thing, but um, in the sense that I have deep compassion. I mean, I'm certain that there are very, 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 very few humans on this planet who have even an ounce of compassion that I have. I'm certain of it.
hmm
I mean, it's self evident. I mean, so many things are, but my metaphysical reality is such, and this is where I was talking earlier when discussing a little bit in regards to my human name versus my non-human name,
hmm
um, or what I call, I don't know, I call it, I guess I would call it like my divine name, for lack of a better way to put it. My divine name versus my human name is
Sure.
that as a person, my experience is sort of one thing, and I'm but it's always motivated by my absolute metaphysical condition. And that metaphysical condition is more closely to what I would call um, the manifestation of Yahda, or the not being, the void itself. And we should definitely delve into that a little bit. But um, like I said, I have to experience life as a person, but also with the, the perpetual driving of my metaphysical condition, which supersedes all other things.
Hmm.
Um, yeah,
No, makes that makes sense to me. I won't say I know, I won't say I know where you're coming from because
yeah,
if your claim is true, that's not possible.
right.
Um, but and again, I think that for me, as I'm relating to what you say, you speak to this. When we were texting before this call, I sort of mentioned that this position that you speak about spiritual uh, privilege,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
which
we,
I
yeah.
is this is for me. I've never heard anyone else speak about this, and I think it's like a really a wonderful. Uh, it encapsulates in a really useful way for me the um, despicable arrogance that's inherent in so much of the spirituality that I've come across in my life.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
people are convincing themselves that they are working for the universal good when they're
Oh my
when they're
God.
not even
Dude,
working for
I
their own good.
yeah, I can't
Right.
even the people these people like call it star seeds, light workers,
Right.
um whomever, these types, the new agey. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've known through my experience plenty of these people, and plenty of them are beautiful. That's not the point. But the point is that the mechanisms that motivate these people are so far from what they think that they're doing.
and
And
and yeah, to me the thing that I find frustrating is not what they're doing, but what they think. It's the pretense that they're doing something else,
yes,
and
yes,
the shame
exactly.
that they feel about what they're actually doing, when in fact what they're doing in reality is not shameful at all. It's very decent,
Well, it's very just human, if
and
you
it
will.
also just is.
Yeah.
Right. So
Well, and that
so there's
it
there's that
always
dimension
comes,
too.
it always comes back to that. Always comes back to just what is.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah. And so, like part of my own perspective is in as I wrote to you, I have a sort of compulsive love for all things forgotten and all things looked away from.
Mm.
And so like my position and the my own compassion for myself and the world comes from, even as people who call themselves light workers, for example, are like easy to make fun of. It's also like I also have a lot of compassion for them because I see the bind that they're in.
Yeah.
I see that they want to be greater spirits than they actually are. And in their refusal
Mhm.
to be as they are, they construct a whole story, blah, 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 blah. Like I've done it myself, so
Sure.
it's like, I'm not, I'm not above that by any means.
Yeah.
Um, it's like, in a sense, it's kind of like and this, it, I'm riffing on this, but it gets back to this whole spiritual privilege thing. Like one of the things that I found really fascinating during like the COVID pandemic and there was when all of this anti-vax stuff was going around. I mean, it's
Mhm.
still out there, but I always found it so fascinating that the anti-vax people that I knew were so desperate to find some kind of scientific evidence for why vaccines were bad.
Right.
when in fact no amount of scientific evidence would have convinced them that vaccines were good. And it's actually much more honest to just say, I know that scientifically vaccines work and I don't want to take them because they creep me out. You know, like
Yeah,
that's a much more
personal
honest
feeling.
position to take.
Yeah,
Um, and yet they're ashamed of that position. And so they have to come up with all this bad science, which is just like irrelevant, you know? Um, and I think that same like where I am, my own position, my own small position is not good enough. It has to be reinforced by like the institution of science or the society of light workers or the group of ascended masters or like whatever group I need to belong to feel validated is just
mm,
like that little drama is played out time and time and time again. And it's
yeah,
so tiresome.
yeah. And every time the person thinks they've found the new truth, when all they've done is just, like I said earlier to you, they've put on a new coat and called it something,
Hmm.
and called themselves something different, right? Like,
I wonder about that. I wonder because I definitely know what you're talking about. And yet I've
yeah,
also, in my own experience, like I feel like I have gone through genuine growths and genuine
mm,
shedding of falseness. Although,
sure.
again, I'm also open to that being, under to my remaining in
Well,
the spell of an ever more
I'll
subtle
make
falseness, blah, 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 blah.
yeah, well, yeah, and you said that earlier, and that's there's great insight in that. It's um, hmm, all of us are in always in a process of evolution, of internal evolution of some kind, right? I mean,
Hmm.
that's
Like
real.
it's in
That
it's
that
in the
is
nature of the physical human vessel, right?
well, it's I mean it's physical, it's metaphysical, we could talk about it's extra physical, it's non-physical.
Okay.
It's all of it. I would say all dimensionality of experience is what makes up the experience, right? It's
Hmm.
um but I guess what I will say is that this process, the thing that I witness people doing over and over and over is that they're not seeing that they themselves, that which by which they identify
Yeah.
is simply in a process. Do you know what I mean? So
Hmm.
there's this constant attempt to remove that which by which they identify from separately from the experience.
Right, right, which is sort
It's
of like reified in the ultimate, like to its apotheosis by like a lot of non-dual neo-Advaita nonsense, where you just are told to identify with awareness itself.
right, but that itself can obviously be a weapon for your own construct. Um,
Right. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
of oh, I have these new non-constructs that I'm approaching it all by, but it's
Right.
just the same. Um,
Yeah, it's
right?
really funny. Yeah,
And
no,
and and and
absolutely.
and there you are again playing that same game that you were just playing. You've mirrored it and you think it's something different and you play for a little while and you act as if it is truly new and different until it becomes apparent that it's not, or doesn't become apparent that it's not. Um,
Yeah.
and but the whole time there's this still this separation, the separation of the self from the experience. And 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 see, for me, where I am, I have no, and that's the thing what people need to understand about me if they do listen or if they do read, and
Mm.
is that you know and it gets very confusing. Of course, it's like it's inconceivable. It's quite literally inconceivable. But
Yeah.
I'm not playing the same game, and not because I don't think I'm. I'm not playing the same game. My condition is so absolute that there is no opportunity for me to play the game that everyone else is trying to either escape from or pretend they're not playing or whatever it might be.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and this is a huge distinction between myself and others, and part of that infinite uniqueness that I spoke of earlier is that it's not that I am special. I don't think I'm special. I don't think, not in the ways that people would usually wield that kind of rhetoric of trying to dismantle people's egos or arrogance or selfishness or whatever they might
Right, right.
assume from an externalized perspective on another. You know, and I keep having this cyclical thought of like, I don't think I'm right. I know I'm right, but knowing I'm right is an integral aspect of my condition and my curse. It's not an
Hmm.
aspect of my wanting to be other. It's not an aspect of me wanting to be special. It's
Hmm.
it's in fact like could not be any more further from that. You
No, I
know,
mean, I have, I mean, again, I am not the way that I can relate to what you're saying. I'll
mm,
say that the way that I relate to what you're saying is that my own, like, whatever wisdom I have acquired over the course of my life was acquired, uh, was acquired because I was not able to fit in, not because I didn't want to fit in, you know?
right.
Like, if I could have taken the easy way, I would have, but I
Oh yeah,
couldn't.
hell exactly. Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
And it's not a question of, I mean, and to me, this is actually where the root of compassion actually starts to rise from, because you realize from that ignorance is not a choice that people are indulging in, right? Like, I would be
Right.
ignorant too if I could, but I was not given the opportunity.
Right. And this, my friend, goes right to that these patterns of privilege and the hierarchies of perception and individuated experiences in existence, and these
Hmm.
levels of ignorance and what is meant by the term ignorance. And ignorance is quite literally bliss for the vast majority, um, in the sense that, and I know this among the quote unquote alternative thinkers is, a faux pas of, because gnosis, we need gnosis and we need um
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
knowledge is power. And I say no, no, not even a little bit. Knowledge holds no inherent value. Zero inherent value. I have
Can you
more
can you
knowledge
speak to more of that? Yeah, speak to that, please.
I have
I'm
more
very interested in
knowledge
that.
within my mind sphere than any man could ever want. I don't want it. I don't want it.
Hmm.
I want
Hmm.
none of it. My truest desire is to have none of it. I want absolute nothingness, but blissful nothingness. That's what I want.
Hmm.
Who doesn't want blissful nothingness?
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Sweet
and
oblivion.
and uh, see, and I have the non-sweet version of oblivion. I have the discursive, disgusting, repugnant, um, festering, endless, boundless abyss of oblivion, but it's only death. And so there's two absolute sides to this polarity, and those are the two. It's life or death, but to the most extreme. It's um yeah, but but people get stuck in these little patterns of, oh, if I just figure out this thing or solve this puzzle or find or play this other game, or because we're all desperate. We're all desperate.
Hmm.
Everyone's desperate. And if you think you're not, you're not seeing your I mean, you're not seeing yourself. And if you're truly not desperate, and it's simply because you're privileged enough to not have to be desperate. And
Hmm.
and and yeah, I speak a lot on privilege because privilege is, it's persuasive, and that I use this phrasing a lot, and I hate saying it, but I discuss in these free will subreddits or whomever or whatever, discussing
Yeah.
the topicality of free will a lot with people, and it's very
Which
funny because
I'd like to get into that too, because you make this
yeah,
distinction between freedom and will that I'm not clear on, but
yeah.
continue your thought, but let's circle back to that at some point.
Um, I, well, the point of what that I was getting at was related to the privilege of position
Yes.
or the lack of privilege of position, and
Yes.
and and the many different ways in which one could be privileged, and the many different ways in which one can lack privilege.
Hmm.
Um, and this plays into the pattern of dynamic of all human dynamic of all cosmic dynamic. Uh, is are the realms in which certain beings and entities are free to exist in comparison to others, and
Hmm.
and and this builds the entire hierarchy of subjective experience. And interestingly enough, now that I'm thinking about it, I see where and why, traditions like caste systems in India or wherever had developed over time, because in a way that's sort of an actualization of the non-physical hierarchy of experience made physical. Uh, does that make sense? So
Yes. Hmm. Hmm.
it's almost more honest caste system. I mean, whatever, that could be discussed in a whole different way. But the point is that
Yeah.
through something like a caste system, they are essentially acknowledging the hierarchy of human experience.
I mean,
Whereas
I think sorry, go on, please, please.
no, where I was going to say, in a lot of Western cultures, we try to push those things under the rug of pretending they don't exist, of everyone's equal, everyone, and of course, the theoretical good is to strive for equality for all beings, but the actual reality is that there never has been equality for all beings and never will be equality for all beings.
Yeah, and the dark side is that when you try to pretend that there is, then what you get, then the only people who are speaking to the truth are like weird Jordan Peterson, like right wing
Yeah,
bozos,
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know, who like they sort of have their finger on like a metaphysical truth that other people are that mainstream society is in fact refusing to acknowledge, but their
Yeah.
solution is so twisted because they themselves are like really fucked up people.
Right.
Um, so yeah, it ends up being a real mess.
Yeah.
Um, so okay, one thing that I want to that I'm really curious about in all of this is that like in your writings, um, you speak about this separation
Mm.
and about the hierarchies in a way
Yeah.
that is irreconcilable. Right? Like the irreconcilability of this separation and of the hierarchy itself is like, it seems to me that this is sort of the linchpin that takes your position from like into a kind of cosmic horror
Yes.
situation, as opposed to like, well, as opposed to like the kind of the Vedic position as I understand it, which is like, well, the only reason that the universe isn't a horrible tragedy is that everything is actually God in disguise. Everything is actually one in disguise. And
Mm.
so
Which
what
which is
appears to
true.
be
But
so
but yeah,
so
keep going.
okay, so no, this is, and this is my question, right? Like if you're speaking about like what comes out of the backside of Brahma, if something is separate from Brahma, then like isn't it true that by the very fact that something is separate from Brahma, Brahma cannot be the absolute.
Ah,
Like, isn't the absolute that which from which nothing is
so
separate?
well, yeah,
And
I hear
how
you.
do
I
you
hear.
where does yeah where does this irreconcilability and
Mm,
come from? Because it feels to me like if there was a way to actually reconcile the apparently irreconcilable, then everything then the problem dissolves and it becomes something different. It becomes a perspective from which horror cosmic horror exists, but not the absolute truth or something. Do you see what I
Mm.
mean?
Yeah, let's pick it apart a little bit, maybe.
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, I'll start with saying what it is outrightly. It's a paradox, and it always has been. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
and that's why these things become completely ambiguous and difficult to discuss, of course. Um,
Yeah.
so you said something about the whole idea of everything is God in disguise, right? And
Yeah. I mean that's the idea. I have had revelations that reinforce that make
yeah,
that lead
and
that like in the current state of occlusion that I exist in because I'm not currently in a state of revelation, my memory of that event leads me to the belief that that is the case, right?
yeah, yeah,
But because I'm
uh,
not in a state of witnessing the absolute at the moment, at least consciously, then
mhm,
I can only speak of it as a belief,
right. Yes,
right?
very, very, very self-aware. Very good. Very good. Yeah. Um, yes. I so just to that simple statement, I will essentially say yes. Yeah, yes, everything is God in disguise. And
Hmm.
and maybe there's this unfortunate but that comes thereafter.
Uh-huh.
Um, um, but not everything is integrated in a manner of a benevolent outcome for all distinct aspects of the infinite manifestations of God in disguise.
Hmm.
Okay.
Okay, I see
So,
that. I mean, I understand what you're saying. I'm interested in if in you speaking more about it
yeah. Okay.
because
So,
it's very abstract at this point.
yes, it is very abstract. Um, but earlier I said something about something being born or made. I would say born or made manifest from the backside of God or the backside of Brahma,
Hmm.
for example. And so now I'll give you a little bit maybe further insight into my own uh, being or lack
Hmm.
thereof. But that's and it's why it's extraordinarily hard to describe my being. But in a sense, what experiencing is the entity which is made manifest from the void itself. And this gets maybe a little bit further into, or maybe makes more paradoxes, like how does the void manifest anything, or what is the void? How does the void
Hmm.
manifest anything? And is the void a part of God, or is it separate from God?
Hmm.
And if it's separate from God, is it, what did you say exactly? Is God the ultimate? I'm not exactly sure how you
Yeah,
phrased it.
yeah, exactly. If you're going to speak about the absolute, right,
Mm,
i.e., that is the absolute by definition has nothing relative about it,
right.
right? I.e., there is nothing
Well,
separate from it, right?
mm,
And so, but then you can talk about God, if you create a duality, like a very, very overarching duality from which the rest of the universe depends, right?
right,
You can create an extremely broad being that has like its fingers in a lot of different pies, but that is still not the absolute because there is something separate from it, right?
right.
I mean, that's my
Yeah,
understanding.
I understand what you're getting at, and I think um I think it's a paradox of position. It's a paradox of subjective position perpetually. Um,
Hmm.
in the sense that, like, I hear you. I'm trying to. I hear you. And this goes to sometimes when I'm talking to other people as well. Like I can hear people speaking their perspectives and even witness them and how they feel them to be true and even know them to be true. And from their perspective, they attempt to speak a truth on another perspective, but all the while they're only doing so from their subjective position.
Right.
Um, and so that is the difference to me between subjectivity and objectivity, if there is any true difference between subjectivity and objectivity, is that outside of the absolute and the absolute alone, there's truly only ever the subjective for each and every one.
Yes. Yes, I would agree with that. Yeah.
And maybe that gets into the solipsistic worldview or whatever you want to think of it as, of just it's just you, yourself, and you, and that's the whole universe. And there is some truth in that, because you, yourself, and you are, or me, myself, and I are the totality of experience as far as that which I've referenced it by, because it's always self-referential. It is never anything other than self-referential. Um, and maybe I've may taken a tangent on the conversation a bit. But
No, it's all good. It's all good. I mean,
yeah,
I guess my question is just fairly is kind of a basic one, right?
okay, yeah,
Which is just that like what I'm what I'm wanting to understand,
yes,
or what I'm curious about in in your own experience is like I have had experiences in which I saw that like the very bars of the prison that we are in are made of freedom, you know?
sure.
And there is another like now I'm not so that I've had a direct experience of.
Well, in that way, we could go just quick, if I may.
Sure,
We can
please.
try to
Yeah.
go to the direction of like people say all is love, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or God is love and all is love.
Right.
And and I think, again, what, going back to this part of the conversation, I would say yes, that's true, and maybe with another unfortunate but. And the unfortunate but is that just because all is love does not mean that each subjective, distinct, self identifying, self referential being within a universe made of love is going to benefit or feel the, the benefit of everything being love.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the ways that one of the things that gets me that really just burns my ass is like, so I've become like party to certain understandings about how to kind of like create sacred space and how to work with sacred energies in ways that are effective, that do something in the collective field, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that knowledge is not very widespread. Not very many people have it, and um, it's kind of one of my big frustrations that I don't totally know what to do with that knowledge. It's kind of a weird one that I'm like working on. But in any case, like to me, there's like the things that can happen in private, the things that can happen when you sort of like close the seal and do some kind of sacred work together are very, very different than things that can happen in a public space, you know? Like this is not now we're not speaking about absolute truth or anything. This is very much like stepped down into the sort of like the level of the level of kind of like
The
maybe
personal.
just the personal and maybe just above consensus reality, let's say, right?
Hmm.
Into the kind of the realm of magic, that sort of thing.
The ethereal, the non-substantial,
Yeah, yeah. Um
non-tangible,
yes,
maybe.
exactly, the non-tangible, right? And I think like most people's experience of the non like one of the more common experiences that people have of the non-tangible is some notion of like holiness, the experience of the holy in some way or another, right? Even if they don't know what that means. But it's a more common experience than seeing auras or whatever, seeing chakras, feeling your chakras open, all this kind of nonsense I don't know if it's nonsense, but stuff that a lot of New Age people speak
Yeah,
about.
not all of it's nonsense, but yeah.
But certainly a lot of it is, yeah.
Well,
And
I
it's
would say people's elaborations on it more so than what it is itself
right, yeah,
are,
and
yeah.
people's willingness to speak about it not from their direct experience,
Right,
also, right.
right.
Um, So anyway, now I'm kind of blah 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 blahing, but the point is like for me, I was speaking to someone about how you can sort of like there's work you can do in a sacred space that you can't do in a public space in a non-sacred space. And they were like, well, I mean, to me, all of creation is sacred, there's really no space that's not sacred.
Mm.
And like I find this to be such a um
Did the person
stoop
who say that to you, do you feel that they said that honestly or pretentiously?
I think they were trying to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't think they were being pretentious. No, they weren't
Okay.
being pretentious. Their relationship with me is not one that they need to do ego posturing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was just thoughtless because it's like, well, do you think that like the bad breath from the rotten teeth of a homeless man is a sacred space? Like, is if that's where you're willing to go, then like my hat is off. Like I'll
Yeah.
tip my hat to you, right?
Mm.
Because that means that you exist in a truly exalted state of consciousness.
Yeah.
Um, but I've met very, very few beings who are capable of such acts,
Yeah,
you
and
know?
I think this goes um a little bit to the direction of like, inherentism, which is sort of, I don't know a word of whether I've coined it or not, but what I refer to as inherentism, and I made mention to you in our messages earlier. I don't
Hmm.
know how much you've read about that stuff that I've posted.
I've seen you reference the word, but I don't have a notion of what you mean.
Yeah, so I use the term inherentism to effectively describe what it is that is absolute to the nature of each subjective thing or being. So,
Mm,
and this is what is absolute beyond belief
hmm.
in the sense that each individuated aspect of the infinite multiplicity of creation has some inherent character, some absolute attribute about itself that is unique to itself and in and of itself.
Hmm.
These attributes are effectively the ultimate determinants of the character and the realm of capacity of a specific being or thing. Does that
Okay.
offer some clarity?
Yeah, I mean, and it makes total sense. I mean,
So,
in small, like when we were texting earlier, and we were speaking about how like this would include not only one's capacity, but also the speed at which one's capacity can change, right?
or
And
the or
everything
the
else.
or it's it capacity. I believe what I said is capacities don't only change, but also um or I said but the realm of change in relation to the capacity is also related to an inherent realm of capacity.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
I mean we can make like some, bold examples. You know, a tree is not going to suddenly become a pig because the tree wants to become a pig.
Right.
A pig isn't suddenly going to become a man because a pig wants to become a man.
Hmm.
A man isn't going to suddenly go from being a pauper and a beggar on the street to the king, or is he? I mean, and
Well,
and
some
this
some prosperity gospel people will, I mean, and Oprah Winfrey will tell you that it's possible,
well,
right?
but exactly, and this is where the human factor gets very much more convoluted and confusing and diluted truly because it's human, a human object, otherwise known as a human being, whatever you want to
Mm,
call it, is is still a distinct expression of an infinite manifestation of creation, just like any other distinct expression of an infinite manifestation of creation, right?
yeah,
And each being must always and can always only exist within its inherent natural realm of capacity to do so. And so,
right.
and this is why I repeat it over and over and over again, is because what inherentism is essentially saying is that no matter what you can only be what you are within the realm of what's possible for you to be what you are. And
Hmm.
and and this is what bridges the conversation into the free will mumbo jumbo and the endless, oh my god, the endless subjective biases of everyone that they overlay onto everyone else.
Well, and
um
not, yeah, not just free will, also like capacity for manifestation, also capacity for gratitude, also
well,
capacity to
it's
perceive the
everything.
subtle, like everything, everything,
It's
everything.
everything.
There's, it's like,
Everything.
one of the reasons I was so struck by your use of spiritual privilege is because I mean, I think about political privilege all the time. I think it's an
Mm-hmm.
extremely useful lens to look
I mean,
through.
you mean something as simple as the king or the president is free to use his people to go to war and be killed for him and his name?
Right. Right.
Can there be? Have we
No,
not
man.
seen this example? Have we
This
not seen this
systematic
example?
privilege doesn't exist. You woke soy boy. Like, forget that.
Yeah,
Whatever. It's
yeah,
so
yeah,
ridiculous.
yeah.
And like, and I also think privilege is so there's a really interesting ugliness to privilege, right? There's a very specific ugliness to the uncomprehending, like idiotic, well-meaning white person just like meeting his own total lack of comprehension of like systematic oppression, you know? It's like quite something to behold.
Mm.
And um so for to sort of like when I started reading your posts and I saw that you were using this term privilege and then you were not using it in a political sense in the post that I was looking at, you were using it in a spiritual sense. It was such a bonk on the head moment because it was like that. Oh yeah, it's that same ugliness of uh
Hierarchy as how to
hierarchy
put
and like, but unacknowledged hierarchy,
it. Oh,
right?
well, of course, it has to stay unacknowledged. It has to,
Like
for
like
for it
someone
to work.
said, so I heard someone or I read someone on Reddit today saying the term house cat libertarian, which is like someone like libertarians who like a house cat fiercely believe in their own independence, not understanding that they live within a system that was designed before they were born to like do nothing but sustain them, right?
Mm, mm.
Um and like that
Like
these
like almost like the you mean like the sovereign citizen sort of thing or
yeah,
something
exactly,
like.
exactly. And I mean just libertarians generally who like
Mm,
think that like they uh they don't need that like they all they know is what they would call big government, and then they think that like the government should just be shrunk down to nothing because they don't understand the system that has sustained them, which like again isn't necessarily a good system, right? Like there are a lot of ways in which the system that sustains us all is a total nightmare.
Of course.
right? I mean, obviously. I mean, even I'm not even talking cosmically, right? Now I'm just talking
Yeah,
governmentally, you know?
yeah.
Um, but like this unwillingness to be participatory, to participate in a system of horror, like itself creates all of this weird fantasy that everyone seems to have to live within, you know? Um, and so anyway, just the idea of, what it's like the white man's favorite pastime is like noticing a little trend and proclaiming it to be a law, right? Like
Mm,
this is such a and like the spiritual realm, the realm of spiritual knowledge, and I use that with scare quotes, quote unquote spiritual knowledge is so full of the most privileged, arrogant, like rich people
mm.
talking about how simple it all is and how easy it all is. And if you
Yeah.
just can, if you could just relax, if you could just blah, blah,
Yes.
blah, blah, blah. And
Yes.
and it's like, it's just as repugnant, if not more repugnant to me than, political privilege.
All you have to do is meditate on the non-self.
Yeah. And so this
12
is my
hours a
question.
day.
Yeah, exactly. Or just 20 minutes twice a day, it's
Yeah.
like,
Twenty minutes. That's it.
I got a different system for you.
Yeah,
I'll give you a mantra.
and if you call now, I'll give you.
Right. Well, so here's the question that I have then. Like, given your uh, metaphysical condition, what do you make of the Four Noble Truths?
Mm,
Like, is Buddhism itself a manifestation of privilege, or is there something deeper than
yes.
that?
Yes, Buddhism is a manifestation of privilege. Absolutely.
Okay.
100,000 infinite percent. Yes. Yes.
Um,
The Buddha had the privilege of being the Buddha.
did the
And
Buddha understand that or not?
that's a good question. And I've asked myself the same. Did
Because
the Buddha
Buddhism, like to me, the Four Noble Truths reek of privilege, of spiritual privilege,
Oh, all of
as
it.
you would
All
define
of
it.
it. All of it does.
But
All of it
Buddhism and
is.
Buddha are like it's not clear to me to what degree. I mean, Buddha was not a Buddhist, obviously, right?
Well, he was just what he was, right?
Right. He was what he was. And
And
so,
therein lies the answer. All he was what he was. And
mhm,
a whole system was made from it. Um, a whole lineage, a whole whatever. And 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 it fails to see Buddha for who and what he was. And Buddha, who and what he was what he was. And what he was whatever opportunity that subjective being had to experience,
mhm,
which was theoretically, theoretically complete and total liberation from cycles of suffering. Theoretically,
right.
um, now you base an entire lineage and thousands of years or what have you on the theoretical absolute liberation from suffering of one distinct entity and think that you can achieve the same by merely following A, B, and C, and you all the time have failed to see the Buddha for who and what he was, and you fail to see yourself for who and what you are.
Hmm. Well, because and it seems like your like what you are is a total repudiation of all of the foundations of Buddhism, as far as I can tell.
Mm.
Um, and that's very interesting.
I would say who and what I am is a total repudiation of all systemic belief systems of any kind, ever.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, maybe Buddhism just has the misfortune of having a very pithy way of expressing its foundational tenets.
Yeah.
So it's therefore becomes easier to dismantle.
Yeah. And I
Um,
guess in a way it's considered maybe secular, for lack of a better word. It's not necessarily the same as other religious constructs. So
Yeah.
it's infiltrated different realms of beings.
Well, and it seems like, I mean, yeah, I would say especially with especially I would not include Tibetan Buddhism in that
Mm.
summary
Yeah,
of Buddhism, I think, but the other ones I think would be well, and even Tibetan Buddhism. I mean, like if you read the works of like Chogyam Trungpa and the Tibetan Buddhists that have really made a big
yeah.
impact
Whom I
in
love
Western
actually. I
culture.
love Pilgrim Trump.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah.
I think obviously a genius.
Yes.
Um, Also a really fucked up guy, right?
Yes. Which is why I
Um,
know I can relate. But
uh,
no, but he, I think someone like him, whatever you talk, or someone like, Osho, for example, if we could bring him into this realm,
hmm
I would
hmm
bring him into a similar realm of complete abandonment of what every social construct says you should or shouldn't be.
hmm
And if that's not the absolute truth, it's very close. It's about as close as you can get because when in such a position, you witness that everything is a fallacy. I mean, everything is a fabrication of of I don't know. I mean, of what of I want to say sentiment. I use that word a lot too. Of feeling.
hmm
Everything's a fabrication of feeling of and how things should and this projected necessity of how things should or shouldn't be or how things could or cannot be that everyone is perpetually laying onto the world from whatever perspective they assume.
hmm